Hi, and welcome to Unintended Consequences from Intent Clinical, where we're discussing the topics that frankly nobody wants to bring up in public. Our company deals with all kinds of issues, from young children all the way through our aging population and their parents, and there's no one better suited to talk about that particular spread of concern than our guest today, David Kay. Out of privacy concerns, we're going to keep his last name anonymous. We hope that we don't goof up and reveal his last name, but I think we can carry on without it. Our co-host, Arden O'Connor, will be also joining to talk about what is it like to live in the sandwich generation. So, first question always is, who are you? What's your background? And welcome.
Thank you, Diana, and thank you, Arden. It's great to be here. So, who am I? What is my background? So, I'm a son. I'm a father. I'm a brother. I'm a lot of things. I'm a son-in-law. I'm a brother-in-law. I have a professional background that includes practicing law for almost 10 years, and then I've been a business owner for close to 15, and then do consulting work. So I've lived a lot of lives up and down the East Coast, and I'm just a person who's dealing with a lot of stuff that a lot of people deal with. I just happen to be dealing with a lot of it at the same time at a level of an intensity that's maybe a bit unusual.
So now that we've teased out and sent the worm out there for our audience about what we're actually talking about, let's start. You talked about being a son. What does that mean right now, today? How are your parents?
They're not well. So I can give you, like, quantifying things sometimes helps, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in the last 3.5 years between the two of them, they've been hospitalized over 30 times. We've gotten dementia diagnoses on both of them. They both have had life-altering falls in the last 3.5 years. Neither one of them will ever walk again. We placed my dad into hospice last week, and he's about to get kicked out because he is not sick enough to stay in inpatient hospice, but their assisted living facility where they've been living is refusing to take him back. So now we're going through the process of trying to figure out where he goes from here. So, the short answer is, how are they? They're not well. They're elderly, and they're, parents who don't die young and who live to get old oftentimes go through this stuff. And that's where we're at.
How long have you been navigating the cognitive decline with them?
We started to have some inklings in 2020. The challenge with 2020 was that it was very hard to parse out what was COVID social deprivation syndrome that we were all experiencing and what was something else. By 2021, it became clear that we got mom's dementia diagnosis. Actually, we got dementia diagnoses on both of them. And with dad, what complicated things was that he had delirium as an overlay on top of the dementia, and his primary care provider, actually none of the providers that were working with him had ever identified that for us. And so we had to learn how to tease apart what was delirium versus what was dementia. And that's been a kind of an ongoing thing. So a dementia trajectory typically is kind of a longer, slower trajectory. Delirium has these sudden drops. And if the cause of the delirium, whether it's a UTI, pain, something else, a medication, if that gets rectified, then you can have a bounce back that gets you back either to or close to the baseline. So we've lived that a lot with dad. Mom has been on a much more steady trajectory.
So you lived with dementia and the other?
Oh yeah.
With both?
Yeah.
Okay, delirium.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I mean, we all navigate, if we're lucky that our parents live long enough and we're old enough to be old people navigating our parents aging, then in some respects we're lucky, but boy, you've got a big package there.
Yeah. And, to that point, one of my two best friends passed away unexpectedly at the age of 42 at the beginning of 2020, right before COVID hit, and left behind a 12-year-old and his wife. So I had a front row seat to what a parent dying young
Yeah.
looks like.
Yeah.
And it's awful in its own
Mm-hmm.
ways.
Mm-hmm.
So um, it, I don't have to work hard to remind myself that fortunately I didn't have that.
Right. Right.
And now what we have is
So
what we're
that's
dealing
the
with.
top half of the sandwich. You're in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Where's the bottom piece of bread? Yeah.
So, by the way, I'm going to come back to the sandwich generation because I actually decided since we originally talked that I don't like that term, and I'll tell you why. But let me answer your question. So, both of our kids have spent over a year in this, again, going back to 2020, early 2022, but things really started getting sketchy in 2021. They both have spent over a year in residential programs. So each had stints in wilderness therapy programs for about 3.5 months, and then followed by residential treatment centers / therapeutic boarding schools. Again, so just some numbers. Our total kid-related mental health and education expenses since 2022 are up over 600,000, and we probably have another 300,000 to 500,000 before we get to the point where they're done with high school. I have been to Utah 17 times in the last 2.5 years. I've already been there 7 times this year. Trip number 8 is coming this weekend. We're going to go visit our son out there. And so, so that's been a big part of the journey. And that has coincided with the downfall or the downturn of my parents' physical and mental condition as well.
So you've had 5 years of being, what's the new term? If we don't like the sandwich generation,
so
what's
I'll tell you,
the
let
new
me tell
term?
you why I don't like it. Let me tell you
why
why I
don't
don't
you
like
it?
I don't like it because it implies that you're stuck. And I think it's a mindset thing. So when I was an undergrad, Carol Dweck, who wrote the book Mindset, was my advisor in the psych department at Columbia. She hadn't written that book yet. It was a long time ago. I'm a big proponent of growth mindset over fixed mindset. And you kind of have to live it daily. Sometimes it comes more naturally than others. And so if you tend to think of yourself as stuck, well, then you're not going to do anything about it. And so I don't think of it as stuck. I think what I would say is that the way I've come to think about this is that you enter this age. So I'm 52, and in my 50s, I'm still very active. I tore my shoulder up playing tennis, so I'm now taking lefty tennis lessons. I snowboard. I'm a very active guy. My body doesn't work the way that it did when I was 25, but it still works pretty well. My brain and my mind are still very much intact. And so you think like, okay, I should be. I've had a career. We've all had our careers, and they've allowed us to reach whatever points they have allowed us to reach. And you have this implicit expectation, like things should be pretty good right now. And then all of a sudden you get to a point where things aren't good because you're dealing with the parents and then you're dealing with the kids at the same time. And you start to, and so I think part of it is an expectation thing. And that because we all know that if our parents live old enough, that they're going to get sick and they're going to have issues, right? That's not a newsflash. Yeah, we have complicated kids. We have 2 kids on the spectrum who have other diagnoses as well. And so that's a complication that not everybody has, but it's also we're not the only ones that have that. So I think the challenge was being able to normalize to this is my life, and this is where I am in my journey, and also letting go of an expectation that at some point the waters are going to calm, because I went through that for a few years. Okay, we'll get through this in 2 or 3 months when we're done with this round of hospitalizations. When our kid is done with this program, that I'll be able to then get back to some semblance of normal. Well, that's just not this journey. And so I think I think of it that way more so than I think that I'm sort of stuck in the middle of something, if that makes sense.
I like that analogy, and I like the idea that it's fluid. What I have questions when I hear about this is there had to be moments where you were really triaging priority. Which of my people that I love needs more of David today?
100%.
You had to be
100%. Yeah. I shared a piece that I'd written with you, so I've started to do some writing on this. I haven't published anything yet.
Good.
But just a couple of weeks ago, I was down in Miami covering hospital duty because my brother was traveling for work. And I'm sitting in a couch at the end of the hallway, 30 feet outside my dad's hospital room. And I'm simultaneously dealing with a new crisis that came up with our son's program in Utah, which required me responding to his therapist, to the academic team, to other folks there, while I was trying to keep an eye on the hallway, because when they make rounds in the hospital, they don't tell you 20 minutes ahead of time, like, hey, we're going to come see your dad. We can't rely on dad to self-report what needs to be reported to a doctor because of his dementia and his delirium. And we also can't rely on him to remember anything that a doctor said. And so I'm sitting here trying to respond to a crisis in Utah while keeping an eye on the hallway. And whenever I have to get up because somebody's walking, it's not a nurse. I don't need to deal with the nurses because they're just doing the routine stuff. But if it's a doctor, I've got to jump up in the middle of what I'm doing. I'm also taking work calls in the middle of all of this from the end of the hallway. So yeah, I was living that like in the moment, and it was almost minute by minute. You forget like day by day. I couldn't plan that day. It just unfolded the way.
What has been the most surprising to you? You know, when I hear your story, and we hear stories that are not so dissimilar of people with small children with issues or not so small children with addictive disorders, depression, eating disorders, you name it, and then adults that are aging in front of their eyes and they're losing capacity. A lot of times we hear things like, gosh, I thought the doctor was going to handle this. I thought we sent him to a therapist. I thought they were going to have the solution. Did you have moments like that? It sounds like you have an enormously positive attitude. Did you sort of just take on this all willingly, or did that attitude evolve over time based on the resources you were finding and your realization as to what level of involvement you were going to need to have?
So look, I think the reality is that if you're just going to ship a parent off or ship a kid off to a professional and just expect that they're going to do their job the way that they're supposed to do their job, you're setting yourself up for failure, and you're setting your family up for failure. And that's just not reality. I mean, you may get lucky. More likely than not, you're not going to. And so for better or for worse, the case management component of this happens to require some things that I happen to be good at. Mm-hmm. And so I've gravitated toward that because to some degree it plays to my strengths. A lot of that is holding providers accountable to do what they say they're going to do when they say they're going to do it. And if they don't, having the conversation with them about it. And then also when you're not getting the results, which we've had that situation multiple times, then being willing to have the conversation around, okay, why are we not getting the results? And where do we need to go to get better answers or better approaches to get results that should be attained? We went through this with our son because our son's presentation on the spectrum, he's extraordinarily smart. He's high functioning. He's verbal off the charts. He's got a working vocabulary that'll make a university professor put a university professor to shame. And there's a profile that's recognized more so in the UK and some overseas countries. It's not widely recognized here because nobody's funded the study to quantify it. It's called pathological demand avoidance, right? And so he was in one of the most respected spectrum-specific programs, kind of a hybrid ABA/educational program here. And they were trying to take an approach with his dysregulation that was informed by pre-crisis intervention principles. So prioritize stabilization over task completion. Well, that doesn't work with a smart PDA kid, because then what the smart PDA kids figure out is if I flash my early warning signs of dysregulation, the grownups are going to make the thing that stresses me out go away. Right. And then I don't have to deal with it and I don't have to do it. And then it gets worse and it snowballs. So we went down that road and it was getting worse and it was snowballing in certain respects. And that led us to a point where we actually ran out of schooling options here locally. So the answer to your question is the answers we were getting when they're not good enough. You don't stop there and say, well, I don't know what to do. You go figure out where to get better answers until you get something that works, which is.
But it's so interesting you say this, though, because how do you know that the answers aren't good? Like, are you watching the behavior of your child and it's not responding in the direction you want? Like, I think of parents and I think of other people we've served who would say, well, the expert said it's X, and they sort of accept that diagnosis. And sometimes, unfortunately, by the time they're realizing maybe the expert wasn't right, we're, 2 years down a treatment plan that isn't working. So like, how do you have that gut instinct?
By the way, it did take years, right? In that particular case, he had only been with that program for not even for a year. That was a year after years of trying other providers who were very highly regarded for whatever it was they did, and they missed the ball in various different ways. So another way to frame the question you're asking is like, when do you know, like at what point do you decide you're gonna bring in heavier artillery or different artillery, right? To the battle? And I don't think there's a magic answer for our son. When I got a call from what was our last option school other than public school, and we knew public school would be a disaster for him. And he had been taking a couple classes in the summer that were sort of soft, like very preferred subjects for him. And I got a call a few weeks into that, and this was a month before the fall term was supposed to start, saying, we're not going to be able to support your kid, and we're out of schooling options. Like, there's no gray area there. Like, you have to do something very different because what you were doing wasn't working, and very different meant he had to go somewhere. For our daughter, when there were some things that we were hearing from her that, given my history of having other family members who've been through major depressive episodes, multiple hospitalizations among other family members, and going back a ways. And my wife has been treated for depression since she was in high school. I know what depression sounds like, and when I hear I don't deserve to go to a good school, I don't deserve to get good grades, I know what that sounds like. And then when that's followed, a week or two later by, I'm not going to go to school anymore. Okay. Like, it's pretty clear that whatever we were trying, it had reached a new level, and continuing to try outpatient and let her continue to struggle and be in anguish was cruel to her. And it certainly wasn't helping. It wasn't helping us. So
you make such a good point about the idea that we parents hang on thinking that home or our love in our orbit is the best solution all the time. And it can't be all the time. And you encountered that.
Yeah. So I'll give you an anecdote on this one. So our daughter spent 9 months in a residential treatment center that specializes in working with adolescent girls who have OCD or anxiety as a primary diagnosis. And about 2-3 months in, they bring parents whose kids have been there for about that same amount of time in for a parent workshop. And so they start off the parent workshop. We're in this conference room in a restaurant. This is in a little town in the mountains in Utah. And there's 5 couples there. The daughters were not in the room for this part of the workshop, and they went around. So we're all sitting in a U, and they went around and they had each couple tell their story. So it was husband, wife, husband, wife, husband, wife. So we were at the end. And so I'm listening to each one of these stories. And by the time they get to us, I'm realizing that every one of these 5 couples, us included, had been married between 20 and 22 years. They were all on original marriages. And our daughter was the only one who didn't have some combination of self-harm, substance abuse, overly sexual behavior, and there was one other. And I'm listening to these stories, and whatever you might think, like, oh, that's not going to happen to our kid because we're still married. We don't have drugs in the house. My wife and I don't do drugs. We don't have any alcohol problems in our house. There's no domestic violence in our house. She's not adopted. All these kids were biological children, so we don't have like the adoption trauma, whatever. If I were holding on to anything like that to say, oh, our kid wouldn't have ended up there, that was dispelled by the time they got to us. And really, the difference was that we took that step earlier in the process. Eating disorder, sorry, was the other one that I was thinking of, because I think either maybe 2 of the 4 of the other 4 had eating disorder. Like that, whatever fiction you create in your mind gets thrown out the window very quickly when you're presented with that. So we just made the decision to take that bigger step when we did. If we kept trying outpatient, it 100% wasn't going to work. And she would have ended up down that road.
When you think about the resources you're looking at, I mean, you're not a professional social worker, at least from my understanding of your career. Yeah.
I didn't stay in the Holiday Inn Express last night either.
And I would say, like, you know, just listening to you, I'm imagining there may be some resistance in your parents' situations around getting help, accepting help, as typical for people with dementia. Certainly with kids, there can be lots of times where kids are asking for something. I always say to parents, your job isn't to give them what they're asking for, it's to give them what they need, and 100%. Distinguishing that, you know, difference. That said, if you're not a professional social worker and a child is saying this program stinks, I don't like it because of XYZ, and you're trying to navigate, you know, is what they're saying legitimate versus not? Like, how do you think about vetting? And we hear this all the time with older folks with dementia. They're firing the caretakers, you know, daily. There's a new rotation. And it's in the first couple times, it's like,
I can we've been down that road too.
Yeah. So how do you look at it and say, like, these resources are legitimate, I'm going to have to push past some of the resistance, versus actually, no, we totally need to pivot and we need to look at a new diagnosis or a new treatment methodology that's less popular here?
It's pretty, let me start with kids and then we'll go to the parents, because kids, it's a little bit easier because they're still under the age of 18. So we can make decisions for them. They don't have to like them, but we can. So, you know, to some degree, when you start a program, like when you're going to ship your kid out of state halfway across the country, our daughter's wilderness program was in the desert. So she spent, I tease her, she spent a biblical amount of time in the desert because Jesus only spent I'm Jewish, but I know this. My brother-in-law is a pastor. Jesus only spent 40 days in the desert. She spent 99. We joke about this all the time, right? So to expect that she's going to get there on day one and think like, this is great, this is exactly what I needed, thank you for sending me here, like, that's not happening. So you know, part of it is just understanding that that's going to be, that some amount of that is 100% going to be normal. And I think another thing that is really critical with the kids especially is just learning to be present when they're uncomfortable and not trying to rescue them from their discomfort. And that is probably what's interesting is, like, as hard as that was with our daughter, in some respects it's even harder with our son, and I haven't quite put my finger on why. And it's not just for me. Even I had a conversation with this therapist on Friday, and I was like, hey, by the way, that family therapy session that we had a couple of days ago, I noticed, and I didn't put this on her. I said, look, I do this all the time and I get it. I also noticed that you were doing it a little bit too. Let's make sure we're not doing that. Let's not rescue him from, he's protesting something right now. He's upset about something. Now, he's still overall in a good place and he's making good progress therapeutically, but you have to be comfortable being in the presence of their discomfort. We knew with both of them, sending them to those programs, they had a lot of really hard work to do. And it wasn't going to feel comfortable. And so that's the first thing. And then I think the second thing is, you know, you look at what is your dialogue with the providers like? How much are they helping you gain insights into what's going on with your child? And how well are they helping you gain insights into your role in the ecosystem? And, you know, those things help you navigate those periods when, you know, when your kids are going through that. I'll another quick anecdote. A few months into our daughter's stay at this residential treatment center in Utah, they changed. So picture there's a very large house that belonged to a family with multiple kids. The program bought the house and turned that into their location, their facility. So it's on like 3 acres, surrounded by the mountains. It's gorgeous. And this big house that belonged to a couple that had lots of money, they had this beautiful kitchen / great room area upstairs. They had another one downstairs with a den and all that. And so they had, for the first few months that our daughter was there, they had essentially an open snack policy. So they would bring in a chef to cook the meals for the kids. And then during the afternoons, if the kids wanted to go in and grab a granola bar or whatever, they could do it. And they decided to change the policy, and they changed it to the kids could get take two snacks with them when they were done with breakfast. And those would be their two snacks that they would have with them for the day. And our daughter and a couple of her friends decided that their fundamental human rights were being violated because they were being denied food when they wanted to have food. And she had gotten herself so worked up that she was actually no longer eating her meals because she had decided she didn't trust the program and this was going on, right? And so my message to the program was, look, I get why you did what you did, right? You can't just have 20 to 25 girls in this program and everybody gets free access to the kitchen no matter what's going on, where they're supposed to be. Are they supposed to be in school in a session or whatever? Totally get that, right? And I sent you a child without an eating disorder, and you're not sending me one back with an eating disorder. So you need to figure this. You need to figure the shit out, okay? And with our daughter, it was, I took a lot of guidance from people about how to handle, but it wasn't trying to solve her. I didn't tell her that I told them that they needed to make accommodations to make sure she was eating, because that would have sent the wrong message. Because that's now dad parachuting into rescue, which I've gotten slapped on the hand more than once or twice for having done that before. So I don't know if that answers your question, but you go through that and you're never really free and clear from it because it can come up at any time.
I guess one other question that comes to mind, and it's a little bit of a pivot, but when we have guests on this podcast, a lot of times the story is one that's it may have some bumps, but it's a fairly linear one. And if I'm hearing you right, it sounds like you are still in the thick of it. So when I say totally. It's a fair, like we had somebody on recently who had a fertility journey, and it was largely like, here were sort of the lowest points and now we've emerged. And it doesn't mean there's not challenges to be seen going forward, but largely it's emerging out of there. It sounds to me like yours has not been necessarily this. We went into the valleys and then came out and we're now at the peak. So can you talk a little bit about some of, what the hardest moments are, and then what you learned from those that might inform the way you think about moving forward with your family?
Yeah. So it's funny. I figured you're probably going to ask the hardest moments question. And I don't know that I could tell you what the hardest moments were, because there have been so many that felt hard. I can tell you one that was really tough was, our son was at a therapeutic boarding school. He started there in December of last year after finishing Wilderness. So this was in Virginia. And the week before their spring break, he got attacked by another kid, and it was a rough attack. And the program mishandled the circumstances. He should have never been in the position where he would have been subjected to that. Staff member had a group of kids out on an outing, had 5 of them. He went to the bathroom, left the kids unattended. That's when it happened. 3 of the other kids had to pull the kid off of our son. It was bad. And so over the course and prior to that, he'd been having a good experience, and we had a good relationship with his therapist, with the executive director of the program. So things were not that there weren't issues, there always are, but things were working, we thought, fairly well. And over the spring break, worked with them to come up with a safety plan because he was worried about going back and being around this kid who had attacked him, and he felt like he couldn't defend himself. And it took other kids to pull him off. And so I drive him back on a Sunday, and at the end of spring break, it's about a 3.5 hour drive from us. And our daughter wanted to come along to support him. She's been a big part of this ecosystem because she's been through it and she's had a good outcome. And we get there, and the supervisor that's supposed to be there when we get there is not there. And then I find out while we're there, and our son is getting anxious. So he's starting to get anxious. We're in the lobby of their building, and one of the staff members, a non-supervisor, our son asks who's there. And the non-supervisor rattles off a list of the names of the kids who are already back. The kid who had attacked him was not supposed to be coming back until the next day. And we find out that the kid is there. So the supervisor's not there. The kid who's not supposed to be there is there. And our son just completely loses it. I can't. So at that point, I go, okay, let me get him out of here. Let's go have dinner. Let me call the executive director, find out what the hell's going on. More like what the fuck is going on. And so I, we have dinner. Ice cream therapy is a big thing in our family. So we have ice cream afterwards. It will make everything good for at least an hour. It may not last longer than that. For at least an hour, the world is good.
I love that form.
Yeah. So we have ice cream therapy, take him back. And he's still now the supervisor's back. So we're having a conversation. And I find out the supervisor didn't read the email from the executive director about what the safety plan was. And I'm like, what the fuck are you guys doing? Like, you guys aren't even, the guy who's here now, nobody called us to tell us the kid was here. Like, I get if the kid shows up, the parents drop him off a day early. You could, if you want to, say, sorry, we have a safety plan and he's not supposed to be here, so go stay in a hotel. Or at least you could call him and say, hey, listen, this wasn't part of the plan. We get it. Let's talk about this. That didn't happen. But now you got your supervisor on duty for the night who doesn't even know what the safety plan is. So in order to leave, I had to pry our son off my leg and put him in the hands of a staff member who had to put him in a therapeutic hold, just to keep him safe, keep him from doing something, breaking something, hurting himself, hurting somebody. And as I was walking out, our daughter was sitting in the car. She was waiting outside in the car. I turned around because I thought I'd heard about therapeutic holds, and I thought, okay, I know he's going in one right now. I should see what it looks like. And I went and I looked at it. It was totally not scary. It basically looked like a bear hug from behind. That's really what it is. You can call it whatever you want to call it, but it was fine. So I get in the car and I can't even talk to our daughter because I'm trying to process everything that just went down that day, and she's got what she's trying to process because she saw what she saw. She didn't see everything. She saw what she saw, and she's got school the next day, and she's been on her own journey. It was an hour before I could even speak to her in the car on the drive back. The next day, I have a call with the owner of the program and the executive director, and I think we're going to be talking about this and how to get them on the right track so that our son doesn't feel unsafe. And on that call, I find out that they're closing the school down in 1 to 2 weeks. So that was Monday. And so by Wednesday, when we had our family therapy call with his therapist, and it was clear that he was still very much feeling unsafe, and he was reporting that they were not following their own safety plan, we had been planning to drive to South Carolina to tour 2 programs. My wife and I were going to be leaving later that afternoon. Within an hour of getting off that call, we'd pivoted. We drove up to Virginia, picked him up, brought him with us to South Carolina, toured 2 programs, came back the next night. I drove 926 miles in 30 hours.
Wow.
And then after that, then after that, flew up to Massachusetts to look at a program that wouldn't take him, flew out to Idaho, and then to Utah to look at 2 more, 1 in Idaho, 2 more in Utah. So I spent the month of April just crisscrossing the country to find out where the hell he was going to go. It's pretty low because he was doing his part. He was doing his work, and the grownups failed him.
I get that.
I have a trick question, and I'm sorry to try and stump you because it's such a powerful story and it's such an example of sort of the depths that you get into, in these moments where you think you're going to do one thing and all of a sudden life flips you the other way. I mean, if there is any silver lining, it's that you have clearly the flexibility on many fronts, emotionally, presumably financially, work vocationally, to be able to manage things to the degree that you can. I'm sure, like many parents, you get calls from parents who are struggling with similar issues, whether it's the adult, their parents or their children. How do you do it if you've got a job that requires you to be there 40 hours a week? How do you do it if you've got, more limited, I'm not even talking financial means, although you could address that, but if your capacity to just be that present in all of these environments is more limited for whatever reason?
So I'd say a couple things about that. First of all, as it relates to the parents, we're talking about the kids. As it relates to the parents, one of the things that we my younger brother and I are the primary case managers / caretakers for them. And we were talking to a geriatric psychologist that had done some work with them up to the point where it was no longer possible, no longer meaningful for her to work with them. And but we had a few sessions with just my brother and I and her, and she said, you don't get to win. You're just picking how you lose. And so some of it is just accepting that that's going to be the case, right? Especially when you're dealing with the aging parental stuff, because that, that's only going to end up in one place, right? And so I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it is that this journey means you make a lot of difficult choices. And we've gotten financial help from my wife's parents. We could have paid for all of this out of our retirement. We would have dwindled, the retirement savings would have come down significantly. But we were fortunate enough that they've helped with a significant amount of this. If that wasn't an option, we would have raided the retirement, because that's what we would have had to do, especially for the kids. And so I think some of it is, and so career-wise, in terms of the time and energy. So that's the dollar piece of it. In terms of the time and energy, I sold 3 businesses in 2022 when we were in the middle of this. One of them had already reduced in value by multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars. Plus I had a reduction in income because I'd already been so neck deep in case managing this stuff. So I made the immediate decision that I wasn't going to work for a few months so that I could catch my breath and also focus on the case management stuff for a bit. And then when I did decide to go back to work, I decided to go back to work part-time doing consulting work because I have more control over my hours. Mm-hmm. Those decisions work for me and they work for my family. They weren't easy decisions. They've had financial implications. I've been cash flow negative for probably since 2019 was the last year I was cash flow positive, where I actually earned more money than it cost to keep my family going. If we didn't have the resources to make all that work, would I have looked at downsizing the house? Would I have looked at other things? Would I have bought, our son was giving me a hard time last fall when we went to visit him at a family workshop in the wilderness program. And at that point we had already traded in the family minivan for an EV for my wife. And I was waiting on a new car it's a low production, fun new car. And so we show up and we hadn't even been there for like 3 minutes. And he looks at me and he says, "So Dad, you bought a new car while you were waiting for another car?" And I said, "Yep." And I said, "So what's your point?" And he said, "Are you having a midlife crisis?" And my answer was, "Listen, I've been living a midlife crisis for like 20 years. So this is nothing new. Mom's good with it. I'm good with it." But I wouldn't have done those things if that, we all have to make decisions when you're in these situations, and they're not fun, and you have to decide like what your level of sacrifice is going to be. And it goes back to like, you don't get to have all of it. You don't get to have everything you want to have out of your career and everything you want to have out of your marriage and everything you want to have out of your relationship with your kids and your parents. That's not on the menu. So you have to be willing to make choices and accept that it's, that some of them are just choosing among how you're going to lose.
I appreciate your candor about this. It's such a sensitive topic, and people will sometimes ask me, why do you start a conversation with the family around, how long has this been going on? Do you have a budget anticipated, whether it's for aging parents or for children? And part of the reason I ask it right up front is it does determine what your options are going to be. And I think where our system makes a mistake is there's sometimes a presumption on the behalf of families that insurance is just going to cover all of this. And in fact, if you've been through it, it covers very little. And sometimes the headache to get the insurance reimbursement is not worth the the reimbursement you actually get. And so it's a painful conversation with families, but I think it's a necessary one. And even families who have plenty of resources, some of them, they really only want to go on a journey that's covered by health insurance, and that's their choice. But it's being realistic with what is that going to look like? How are you going to, what are the options? Exactly.
Look, if we didn't have the resources that we had, insurance coverage is a joke. We've spent, the numbers, right? It's over $600K. We've gotten $5,000 back from insurance.
Mm-hmm.
It's a joke, right?
Wow.
So if we didn't have those resources and we had to think about moving to another city that actually had better public school with appropriate support with better level support for high functioning kids on the spectrum, if that was the decision we had to make, then I would have made that decision. And I think, for where we are, we had another reason. My wife's parents live in town and their health is not great. Their mobility has declined quite a bit also. They're not yet at the point that my parents are at. They're a ways away, hopefully. I just think it comes back to, that question, Arden, is a great question, because you need to know what you have to work with. And I think what I would encourage the parents / caretakers, parents / sons, if you want to call it that, because I'm both, is the more cards you're willing to put on the table to play with, the more options you're going to have to try to figure out something that's workable. The more lines that you draw in the sand that say, I'm not willing to do this or I'm not willing to do that, you end up constraining yourself. And it doesn't mean you have to give away everything and and have nothing left for yourself and for your own needs. It's just a way to say that the more flexible you allow yourself to think through, the more likely you are to be able to find paths that you can work with.
It's really helpful advice. So I'm going to ask my last cheesy question, because I always ask it. If you had to laminate something on a piece of paper and carry it in your pocket to remind yourself of yourself, and what is that shining moment for yourself, what would that statement be?
I don't know that I've been asked that question in that way. It's probably I show up. I'm not always at my best. It's not always pretty. I don't always get great answers. I don't always do great things. I always show up.
I love that. And sometimes that's got to be good enough.
That's it. And you have to allow yourself the peace and the grace to recognize when you're going through stuff like this, you're not always going to be at your best, and that's okay. Can't hold yourself to that standard because it's not possible.
Totally agree. Thank you so much. Thank you for being so candid about such painful stuff and really thinking through and being thoughtful and giving advice on, for other families going through kind of a smidge of what you're going through, how you think about it, because I think it's really valuable, and you've clearly had a lot of time to reflect, because frankly, it's unfortunate, but these journeys have been going on for a very
Yeah, it's been more than a minute or two. Well, I appreciate your having me, and hopefully what I've shared can help folks who are going through whatever they happen to be going through.
And to our audience, listeners, watchers, if you like this episode, please let the world know. Click that button. Yell it from a mountain. Let us all know. Talk to your friends. Unintended Consequences. Thank you very much.
Stronger than when you feel caught out. Don't let the words let you drown. Take all of the sound.